And away we go. Hi, everyone. We're back. And we're not going to spend the entire podcast talking about Jalen Ramsey. We've done that enough. We're probably going to have to address it just a little bit because we have to. This is the All Dolphins podcast for Wednesday. I forget the days. Wednesday, April 16th, 2025. You see a new face next to me on the screen. You should know the name if you were a reader of the Miami Dolphins on SI.com because he is a frequent contributor. Also works for the 33rd team, a draft guru, all-around good guy, Dante Colonelli. How are you, Dante?
I'm excited to be here. This is my time to shine. This is my time of year. So it's so exciting. I'm pumped. The Dolphins haven't had 10 picks in forever, so I'm elated.
That's why you're pumped, or is it you're pumped because this is your first time as a guest on this fine podcast?
Well, I'm doing double duty. It's great for draft season, and it's also awesome to finally get on the show. I mean, I watch the show pretty frequently, so it's nice to finally be here, get to talk to you. You and I usually correspond over email. So this is like, we hung out in Indy a little bit, but this is like our, first time really chatting ball. This is exciting stuff.
Okay. And I'm expecting no less than a whole bunch of nuggets of knowledge being dropped here. Where to start? We're going to focus mostly on the draft today. For those who haven't seen it yet, on Miami Dolphins on SI.com, Dante has dropped his 7-round Dolphins mock draft 3.0, which means there was a third one. Encourage you to check all three. At the very least, check out the one that came out today. And by the way, I learned something today that I didn't know, and shame on me because I'd only seen his name appear. Barron's first name, the cornerback from Texas, apparently it's Jedi. Sorry, I've been pronouncing it.
Not Jedi, it's Jedi. Okay.
You know what? I still don't know for a fact. I need to get a Texas media guide for a pronunciation guide. But we like Mr. Barron, however we pronounce his first name, don't we, Dante?
We really do. It's hard to argue with going cornerback in round one, given the current situation of that room. Even before the Jalen Ramsey news dropped, they needed a starter there. And one of the reasons I've been so gung-ho about Barron is I think you can put him in the slot, and I think you can play him outside. So that gives you flexibility with Kader Kohu, who's back this year. And that also, if you want to sign a free agent after the draft to add to that room, it gives you flexibility with that player as well. If you want to add an outside corner on May 1st and you can play Barron in the slot, play Kohu outside, you can swap those two. You can add a free agent who mostly plays in the slot. So I think like Barron's talented enough to go in the top 15. And for a team like the Dolphins who need safety help, need multiple corners, I like the idea of getting a player who could probably play multiple spots.
Okay, it's funny you should mention the Dolphins need safety help. Chris Greer doesn't think so because Chris Greer said yesterday during his annual pre-draft press conference that the two starting safeties are in the building, which is a very, very nice thing to say. And I'm trying to think real quickly here as I juggle it inside my head, whether this was a statement made to encourage and pump up the players he signed and the players who are on the roster at safety currently, or whether it was completely legit. And don't think for a second the idea of like, and you know this, Dante, and fans should know this, that a lot of times general managers will make, coaches, teammates will make statement about their own players that maybe exaggerate what the reality is. Because you wrote about this also on the site today, that are they really set at starting safety like Chris Greer says?
I don't think so. And I put this in the story. If you take his words at face value, maybe, but Ashton Davis was getting phased out of the Jets defense for the past 3 years. He has not been a major contributor to an NFL defense since 2021. And I think Ashton Davis is a perfectly fine backup safety. I think he can do a lot of nice things for you if he's your third safety, but the idea that you're going to put him and Afitu Melifonwu out there, that is a player in Melifonwu who I think we both probably like, right? Like we like that contract and think he's a fine player. He's played more than 10 games once. So your two starting safeties are a player who has mostly been a special teams contributor for the past 3 seasons, and Melifonwu, who through no fault of his own cannot stay on the football field. So I have a hard time believing that they're set at safety, but the draft doesn't really line up as great for them because they have other needs at more premium spots like cornerback, like interior defensive line. I think offensive line's another one that you could talk about. Where do you go safety? If you do it at 13, then you're passing on corner, you're passing on interior defensive line at premium prospects at premium positions. So it's a bit tricky. It's easy to sit up here and be like, we don't, Ashton Davis, Melifonwu, maybe not exactly who they would want at safety, but that's two more bodies than they have at the cornerback room or on the interior defensive line. They didn't sign any new players on the interior defensive line. They didn't sign any new players at corner except for Artie Burns. So
a long ago first round pick,
right?
Yeah, no, a long ago first round pick. No, and I don't want to be mean, but it was like I remember like when we did the Zoom conference call or the Zoom media session with Artie Burns, one of the questions was like, how do you envision your role? And in the back of my mind, the only thing I can think of is I'm going to try to make the 53. It's like, this is a guy who's been a journeyman. It's not like we're signing him former first round pick, boom, he's a starting lineup. And as I go back again, Chris Greer saying he's confident that they have the starting safeties are in the building is not him signing a letter guaranteeing that they're not drafting a safety. It doesn't guarantee anything. It's just a vote of confidence for the guys in his building, which again, GMs, coaches, players will do. Want to go back quickly, because you mentioned Kohu's ability to play inside and outside, which Chris Greer also mentioned, and Barron having the same kind of ability. This also is a move that I think maybe for down the line, if the idea is that Barron would play inside. I'm of the opinion, I've said this many times, I don't like Kohu nearly as much on the outside as I do in the slot. And I don't know that's ideal. And it could be that, remember, and Kohu signed his restricted free agent tender to come back that now we signed for only 1 year is a UFA after 2025. It's possible maybe a plan. You draft Barron, you try him outside. If it doesn't pan out, then you move him inside in the second year and you let Kohu go. Unless Kohu completely blows up and has such a big year that you don't have a choice but to re-sign him. The other cornerback prospect who's often linked to the Dolphins is Will Johnson. And as everybody should know by now, with Will Johnson, the issue is injuries and the fact that he's not a burner, which doesn't have the kind of the speed that you'd like to see a cornerback have, except the dude is a playmaker.
Yeah, I think if you look at Johnson's injuries, and I think we wrote about this for the site as well, I'm not overly concerned. This is not a player who's returning from a torn ACL. He didn't break any bones. He had a turf toe injury and he pulled his hamstring. Look, soft tissue injuries, they can rack up. They can be a problem. Dolphins fans know about that. Devontae Parker comes to mind. He had the foot, the hamstring, right? Like he was on the injury report every week. So I'm not saying that there's no red flags with Will Johnson, but, as far as pre-draft injuries concerned, I think if Michigan was better, Will Johnson would have come back last year, if I'm being completely frank. I think he was content to not risk further injury by playing at 70% because Michigan wasn't having the season that they expected to. That's speculation. I'm not reporting that. Total speculation. It wouldn't shock me. But I think when you watch Johnson on tape, I think he's fast enough. He didn't run the 40. Reports are that he would run, 4.5, 4.55. I think that's fast enough at corner. That it doesn't bother me. I think his play speed's better than that. So for me, Johnson is an outside only player. So if you're looking to hit a home run at corner at 13, you want to take a player who has all pro potential. His 2023 tape it's dynamite. It's out of this world. If you are moving on from Jalen Ramsey, you only have Kader Kohu. You want to take a shot on a guy who might be an all-pro caliber player, Will Johnson's the pick at 13, if him and Barron are on the board. The reason I tend to lean Barron is I think he helps you now in a lot of areas, and I think you have it's easier to build around him long-term because you can kind of move him around a bit and pair him with players that complement him. But if you're looking, hey, we just want to shut down one side of the field, we're going to take Will Johnson, give him a shot, let him go out there, and he's a great scheme fit. I think he's a perfectly fine athlete too.
True or false, though? Barron has a much more likely chance of being available at 13 than Will Johnson.
I think true. I think Barron, he's a little bit smaller. He doesn't quite have the pedigree that Will Johnson has, right? Like Barron just the 1 year of really good tape at Texas. So I think Barron's a lot more likely to be there at 13, but Johnson's a weird one. Will teams not like the turf toe, the hamstring, the not running the 40? It's been a weird pre-draft process for him because I think if you watch just his play at Michigan from 2023 to 2024, I think there's a fair argument he's one of the 5 best players in the class off that and not considering anything else. But when you start to build in the rest of the profile, teams might be a little bit hesitant to bet it on that, right? Especially that high in the draft. So it's going to be strange. I do think there's a higher chance that Barron is there at 13, though, than Johnson. I could easily see Johnson going top 10.
Okay. You referenced Devontae Parker before, and I remember at the time having a little bit of a twinge of uneasiness when the Dolphins drafted him because of his medical report where he had screws inserted into his foot at Louisville. And to me, it's like, shouldn't your first round pick be a little bit more pristine when it comes to medical issues in his body, not having,
right,
screws or what's what hardware inserted inside it? To that end, I see Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, who's a cornerback who's got very good reputation, who a lot of scouts are very high on. He's also had a nasty hip injury that he's coming off of. To me, I would be like, red flag city right there for me.
Yeah, I think it's hard to think of a more concerning injury for a cornerback than their hip. Of all the things that a corner is going to get hurt, as an amateur scout, it's like, I don't want to see a hip injury on the scouting report. And Benjamin Morrison's tape is awesome. He was stellar when he was on the field. All of the reported medical checks have been fine, although you rarely actually see the publicized medical checks go poorly. I honestly cannot remember the last time a leak of a medical check was bad. Usually you find that out after the draft when the player goes way later than you thought. It's all of a sudden, the medicals weren't great. So Morrison, as far as we know, is progressing well. The tape was good, but I'm with you. I think of the corners who have injury concerns, there's a few of them. Morrison's probably the one that I'm the most worried about just because corners have to be fluid in the hips. They just do. And so any restriction at all in there, even, if you're the Dolphins, a team that is trying to win games this year, is he going to be 100% in week 1?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that leads into the question of, okay, are the Dolphins making moves for 2025 or 2026?
Right. We could do a whole podcast on that if we wanted to.
Yes, we could. Maybe we will at some point. There's another issue with a cornerback who's a very good prospect, but he's coming off a torn ACL. The dude from East Carolina.
Yep.
Which, again, makes me, to borrow an old Dolphin phrase, a little bit queasy. Because this is a team that's had so many injury issues, and every team has injuries. And I've pushed back against the idea that the Dolphins 2023 season, for example, went off the rails strictly because of injuries. It went off the rail because of injuries, and also because they had never shown during the season that they could compete with the big boys. And whatever fighting chance they might have had to compete with the big boys kind of washed away at the end of the season when everybody on defense basically started getting injured the second they got on the field. So I think the Dolphins maybe, I know Chris Greer doesn't believe that. Chris Greer, and the one example he always uses, this might be before your time, is Curtis Martin, who had injury issues at Pitt, gets drafted by New England, and has a career that's borderline Hall of Fame. And then you get another case could be made for Thurman Thomas, who, memory serves, either blew out an ACL. Frank Gore's another one, blew out 2 ACLs at the University of Miami, played for 18 years, never missed a game, basically. So it depends on the philosophy. You would think maybe the Dolphins would be a little bit more sensitive to avoiding those kinds of players because injuries have been such an issue for them in recent years. But I don't know that that's been their pattern necessarily.
It doesn't seem like it's their pattern. And if free agency is any indication, it's not going to be their pattern, right? They sign James Daniels coming off a major injury. If Fitu Melifonwu is awesome when he's on the field, he's not on the field very often because of injuries, right? So Savon Ravel's injury is a little bit less concerning to me just because I think the science behind ACL repairs has come so far. So many of these guys tear their ACLs and they come back. Some guys, it takes them a little bit of time to get back up to speed, whether that's, half a season or whatever. But I mean, God, I feel like 10 to 12 guys tear their ACL every year, and I'd say 95% of them come back and are still productive players. So the ACL tear for Ravel is a lot less concerning to me than the hip. Now, that doesn't mean that the Dolphins should continue to invest in players with injury histories. That's not what I'm saying. But they don't really seem like they're going to stop anytime soon. There's no indication that they're going to stop. So I think Ravel's in play at 48. I think if he's there, I'd be hard-pressed to find a player whose tape is better at that spot, assuming they didn't take a corner at 13. I don't know if they're going to take 2 corners in a row, but they could. They've
done it before. In 2009, they drafted Vontae Davis in round 1, Sean Smith in round 2.
There you go. Not bad players.
No, it worked out. Vontae Davis, by the way, for those, and then he was in the news last week, or I should say his name in the news, the late Vontae Davis, R.I.P., that apparently they still don't have a cause of death, passed away at a very young age last year. And very sadly, he's going to be remembered by a lot of Dolphin fans for that scene on Hard Knocks, which, while entertaining, also I don't want to be an overly softy here, but I don't know, maybe they necessarily didn't need to be. I don't know. I'm getting soft in my old age. I don't know, but my point is, the dude could play. I mean, he didn't take the craft seriously enough when he was in Miami. That kind of straightened out a little bit when he got to Indy, and he was a really, really good player. Made the Pro Bowl with the Colts, and he was the best tackling cornerback the Dolphins had, maybe ever from in my time. Cater's not that far behind. Cater can tackle.
Cater can really tackle. Yeah.
So they could go there. If you listen to some Dolphin fans, they would want offensive line, 1st round, 2nd round, 3rd round, maybe 4th round too. Especially since we had the sharp football analysis numbers on the offensive line. And I don't know where you get your metrics for offensive line play. There's a lot of different things, and there's so many different sites that do these things, like the ESPN win block rate, pass block win ratio, and all that. Well, it's somebody deciding what's a win, what's not a win. Number one, there's the human element involved. I looked at Pro Football Reference has yards, for example, on the rushing plays, yards before contact average, which would be an indication of offensive line clearing the path. And in press protection, I look at pressure rate. And on pressure rate, Dolphins are actually doing pretty well. Yes, they get, and it's certainly helped by the fact that they get rid of the ball very quickly. Those Tua takes 2 steps back and fires, to the wing. That obviously helps the pressure rate. It also helps, again, for those who look at the insanely low average time to throw. Well, that's counted in those. When Tua goes 1-2 back, I throw it to because it's a design play. That goes against the average. That takes 1 second. Well, that's going to skew the average a little bit. So, but my whole point being, babbling to get to one very specific point here, the offensive line was not good, particularly in running short yard situations. I don't know that it was a disaster that everybody wants to portray it to be, particularly before Austin Jackson went on IR, and then which coincided with Teron Armstead's knee starting to give out on him.
Yeah, I think you see a big difference between how the national media perceives the Dolphins' offensive line versus how people like us who write about the team every day look at the offensive line. And so the national media looks at the line, they see Austin Jackson's pass blocking numbers, and they see Patrick Paul's overall. I hate talking about offensive line like in terms of in statistics, right? But they see Patrick Paul's pressures allowed and different things like that, and they go, the Dolphins tackles stink. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Austin Jackson and Patrick Paul are really good pass blocking tackles, because I don't believe that. But if you are Chris Greer, you just spent the 52nd pick on Patrick Paul last year.
Mm-hmm.
Are you really going to spend the 13th pick to replace that player? And he, again, at his press conference yesterday, he said Patrick Paul's the starting left tackle. He said it. And I didn't really need him to say that. I could have told you that 3 months ago. It's so. Now, could they use another guard? Could they use somebody who can play guard this year, kick out the tackle, and replace Austin Jackson in a few years? A player who I think is a solid NFL starter when he's on the field, but he's another player who's been injured a bunch throughout his career. The injury last year really derailed, I think, the team's running game specifically. The passing game's a whole other conversation. Jackson is the best run blocker on the team last year. I think that's still true this year. Do you want to draft a player that to hedge against his injury? I wouldn't hate it. It wouldn't be the worst pick in the world, but this idea that the Dolphins are going to just throw 6 picks or whatever, crazy number you want to use at the offensive line is just not rooted in reality. It's not. And look, I'm not a Patrick Paul guy. I'm not. I've never have been. They got to see what he can do. They just do. You spent the 52nd pick on the kid. Let him go out there and start. If he's not good, all right, fine. But you can't just replace him without giving him a real chance. He really got I think he started, 4 games technically or he played in 4 games last year. And he had to come in the middle of the Packers game. And then he played at right tackle against the Jets. And it was a disaster because he didn't know what he's doing over there. It wasn't fair to him. I think if you give him this long runway, you let him play at left tackle, I think he can be okay for you. And if you have 2 okay tackles with the way that Tua gets the ball out so quickly, the playmakers that they still have on the perimeter, I think you're fine. There's a conversation to be had about whether or not that is sustainable long-term, blah, 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 blah. That's not where we're at right now. So I'm with you. I don't know that – I think the offensive line can be good enough. Right. And so I think James Daniels was a great upgrade. I'm glad that they signed him. I would like to see them add an offensive lineman at some point in the draft. I think they should get somebody in the mix to compete for that other guard spot. But I don't know that I'm targeting that player at 13. I think that's 48, 98, 116, and maybe 135 if you want to push it that far, but not at 13.
Yeah. And here's the other thing also, if we're going to be honest about it, yeah, the run blocking was massively insufficient at times. Let's not pretend like the Dolphin running backs broke a whole lot of tackles last year.
No.
They didn't. And that's just not my eyeball saying that. It's also some of the analytics that say that as well. Yeah. Again, it would be great to get a complete stud at 13 on the offensive line. That's wonderful. Except the Dolphins have a lot of needs. I mean, right now you're looking at Zach Sealer, Benito Jones, and Matt Dickerson as your starting defensive line. And I'm sorry, that doesn't do it for me. And you're looking at, the other point I was going to make. Along the same lines as Patrick Paul and the Dolphins absolutely needing to find out what they have, to me, unless they get 2 high-end cornerbacks between now and the start of training camp, I am going to go on record as saying I think it's borderline criminal if Cam Smith doesn't get the first team reps at the start of training camp. Find out what you have.
Yeah, sink or swim.
Within a week or two, and obviously the Dolphins are going to be spending time with him throughout the offseason, so maybe they will have seen before then and gotten their answer. If they don't have their answer at that point, get him the first team reps at cornerback at the start of camp, and then reevaluate after 2 weeks. If you can see that he can't handle it, guess what? The Dolphins completely messed up that second round pick, but at least make that determination instead of, bouncing back and forth. And because so far it has not been done. And there have been issues that have been stated by assistant coaches in terms of preparation and dedication and all that, with Sam Madison 2 years ago, basically kind of suggesting that he wasn't putting in the hours. He basically, I think the comment was basically he needs to showing up early and start staying late. And then last year, I don't know if it was Brian Duker or another one, or maybe Ryan Slowick, who basically saying he needed to work on his body. And that to me, that's
in year 2. That's not what you want to That's not what you want to hear. In year one, okay, fine. You just came from college. You got to work on your body. Sure. Not in year two. Like that, you got to be at least put together, right, to be on the field at that point.
Let me go back to picking your draft brain here, because what I'm hearing a lot and reading a lot is that removing Mason Graham from the equation, there might not be a defensive tackle who could justify or would justify the 13th overall pick. I find Kenneth Grant massively intriguing, understanding that the game's maybe not totally there just yet.
I think Grant would be okay at 13. I think that's I think that's perfectly fine value for that player. The interesting part of the equation for the Dolphins is that I would tell you that there's a lot of overlap between Benito Jones and Kenneth Grant. And so the question that then I would ask is, if you take Kenneth Grant, how much are you really getting out of Benito Jones, who right now is the only other player in that room besides Zach Sealer, who is a legitimate NFL player, frankly. No offense to Matt Dickerson. He's a depth guy, hasn't played any football.
Or Neil
Farrell. And so I think with Grant, I think talent-wise, sure, you can take him at 13, and if the Dolphins take him, I think that would be a good pick. Really, really interesting athlete. I mean, guys just don't move like he does at 340. You know, like it's just there's the only other player I've seen move like that is Dexter Lawrence, and he's an all-pro talent for the Giants. So I think Grant would be nice at 13. I think if you're the Dolphins, though, you have to hit the interior defensive line again, either in the draft. If you take Grant, you need to get somebody who's a little bit more of a penetration style player, someone who could be like a 3-tech, right? That you're spending a lot of capital on nose tackle, and that's fine. They need one. That'd be great. They haven't had a really, really good nose tackle in a long time. They had some okay nose tackles, but not a really, really good nose tackle in a while. So I think that would be fine value, but you either need to get another guy in the draft, or you need to get a couple guys in free agency after the draft to complement Grant and Jones and Sealer, because you have kind of redundant skill sets. Obviously, Grant is like Benito Jones all the way maxed out. I think Grant's a better player than Benito Jones, but at their core, they're both nose tackles. They're big dudes who anchor and defend the run. You're just hoping that Grant develops a little bit more of that athleticism that Benito Jones just doesn't have naturally. But if I'm trying to think like the Dolphins, I don't know that Grant is going to be overly appealing to them at 13. It's a really deep defensive tackle class. Chris Greer made a point to say that he thinks the draft lines up with their needs about 100 times yesterday. And if he truly thinks that way, I think he would believe that this is a really deep defensive tackle room, and maybe they'd be better off going 48, 96 or 98, with that pick. But I wouldn't entertain the Derek Harmon and Walter Nolans of the world at 13. It's Kenneth Grant or bust, really.
Okay, fair enough. That's assuming Mason Graham's off the board, which
of course, yeah,
everybody seems to think he is. Okay, I brought this up on the podcast yesterday. I think there was another that it wasn't just me. Chris Greer was asked at the pre-draft press conference about the possibility or whether he would rule out under any scenario the possibility of drafting a quarterback in round 1. By the way, I'm the one who asked that question, and I asked that question because Adam Schefter threw out the Dolphins as a wild card scenario for Shedeur Sanders, and lo and behold, Charles Robinson from Yahoo.com threw out the same thing today, and basically along the lines of it would be protection against. And he prefaced it by saying, I'm not expecting it to happen, but it would be protection against Tua, again, having injury issues in 2025 and beyond. Because as we said before, and it bears repeating, the Dolphins are basically borderline locked into Tua as their starting quarterback for the next 2 years. If they do anything at quarterback, it's beyond that or protection against another injury. Thoughts on Shedeur Sanders? Does he do anything for you as a prospect?
I like Sanders as a prospect. I just don't really think it makes sense for the Dolphins to spend the 13th overall pick as a hedge against an injury. Like I don't think that that's appropriate value. I really don't. If you are really that concerned with a Tua injury, go sign another veteran who's better than Zach Wilson. There was a lot of them out there, right? Like I don't, and that's setting the Zach Wilson conversation aside for a moment. You could have gone out there and signed Jameis Winston. You could have gone out there and, tried to get a bunch of other veterans who signed with other teams who have more experience and better tape than Zach Wilson, and then use the 13th overall pick on a player who's going to play, right? So Atlanta did this last year with Kirk Cousins, right? Like they took Michael Penix at number 8 overall, and because Cousins was coming off the Achilles and they were hedging against that, they didn't feel like Cousins was the quarterback of the future, even if they felt like he was the quarterback of the present. Here's the problem with that. Now, it ended up working out for them, like sort of, but in the ideal scenario here, you take Shedeur Sanders at 13. The ideal scenario is that Tua never gets hurt, right? Like ideally, you don't really want your starting quarterback to get hurt, of course. And Tua is good when he's on the field. So if he's not getting hurt, it means he's probably playing well enough to make you a competitive team that is winning games. So the ideal scenario here, Sanders never sees the football field. And to me, spending the 13th overall pick where that's your ideal outcome doesn't make any sense. When the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts, it was a second-round pick. It was right near, I think might have been pick 48, if I remember correctly. It was in that like 45 to 55 range. They took Jalen Hurts. Sanders will not be on the board when the Dolphins pick at 48. That would be shocking. But if they were to take that strategy, you could talk me into that a lot more than at 13. That's a premium pick in a draft that has good depth, but not a lot of premium players. And that's your best shot to get one. And so spending that on a backup quarterback just doesn't make any sense to me, unless you have a wild trade lined up for Tua, which they do not. That is not a thing. So I don't really understand it personally. I don't see it.
Yeah, and for those who would be thinking about the possibility, I don't see how Tua is tradable either, because he's got so much money guaranteed this year and next year, which goes to the team that's going to acquire him, commit those kind of dollars for an injury-prone quarterback. To me, I don't see a world where that actually exists. Okay, one quick Sanders Dolphins related note, and then one final draft question for you, and then we're going to wrap it up. My Dolphins related note regarding Shedeur Sanders, and I mentioned this on social media, like how he's getting his number retired is mind-boggling. I know why, but it's still insanely ridiculous. I get Travis Hunter's fine. You won the Heisman. There's a 2-time consensus All-American. Colorado has 5 2-time consensus All-Americans. They have 29 consensus All-Americans. Shedeur Sanders never got that accolade. The Colorado in his 2 seasons as the starting quarterback was 13-12, didn't win a bowl game. So other than being Coach Prime's son, I do this like this because calling him Coach Prime and then him demanding to be called Coach Prime is wow. Anyway, that to me is over the top again, because if you're going to go, it's not because of team accomplishments, then it's individual recognition. Then why wouldn't you honor the 29 guys who were consensus All-Americans as opposed to a guy who wasn't? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy like that. And my point, this is the Dolphin Connection. One of those 29 consensus All-Americans who played at Colorado, this is way before your time, Dante, was a safety by the name of Dick Anderson, who was a member of the perfect team of 1972.
Okay.
Who was also
well before my time.
who was also the 1973 NFL Defensive Player of the Year. How about that?
That? Is his jersey retired at Colorado?
No. That's correct. No, they have retired 4 jerseys before now. One of them is Byron White, and I don't know how much of it is due to the fact he became a Supreme Court justice. One of them is Rashawn Salam, Heisman Trophy winning running back. The other 2 gentlemen, their name escaped me at this moment, but it wasn't Dick Anderson. And It may have been one of the other consensus All-Americans, but they had 29 of them, and they've retired 4 numbers right now, and they're adding Shedeur Sanders. Again, I have no issue with Travis Hunter's number being retired, but Shador, I don't get it. Okay, final draft question before we wrap this up. Who is one prospect Dante Colonelli really, really likes, who is not somebody who has been mentioned many times or is very, very obvious?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I get paid the big bucks.
That's right. For the Dolphins specifically, I'll pull a really random name out of a hat. Arkansas receiver Isaac Tasala. I think he is the prototype Shanahan receiver, kind of like Juwan Jennings out there in San Francisco. Bigger, straight line speed, slot player, really good hands, great in contested situations. Total day 3 guy, but he moves so well for his size. And look, when I'm on day 3 of the draft, I just want to draft the big dudes who run fast and just, I'll figure it out later. It's day 3. If they make the roster and they're backups, that's a win. I think he, to me, profiles as a similar player to Nick Westbrook-Akine. So I don't know if the Dolphins will want to invest too much at that spot. I think there's room for both players, especially long-term, as this team, assuming things go well this year, which I'm not assuming that, but for this hypothetical, let's say that. Assuming things go well this year, and as the offense continues to evolve, I could see them incorporating more different types of receivers as Tyreek Hill kind of moves on and they have to adapt the offense and blah, blah, blah. So he's like a really out of the box pull that I would do for day 3. I think at like 116, 135, I forget what the number for the 5th round picks are off the top of my head. 155 maybe is another one. So I would look at him in that range. Really fast, contested catch. If you haven't checked out his tape at Arkansas, I don't blame you. They weren't very good this year, but give it a watch before the draft. He's a ton of fun.
Okay, very good. And my philosophy on like 3rd day picks, particularly 6th or 7th round, is this is where you get your specialists.
Yep.
And they can save a little bit of salary cap space if they want to move on from Jason Sanders. Not saying they should. I'm saying it's a thought. Or a prospect or special teams help if a guy's going to be really good on special teams, or a prospect that has a unique skill that may be a total gamble, but there's something there that stands out that could lead to something big.
Right, like something you can develop. Yeah.
Like last year for me, I've brought it up several times. I'm still mad at the Dolphins not taking a shot instead of drafting Mohamed Kamara in the 5th round, who basically rode the pine the entire season. Why won't you take a shot at Joe Milton with those freakish athletic skills? He may never amount to anything as a quarterback, but it's such a premium position. Why not give it a shot?
I would imagine that Mike McDaniel sat down to watch his tape and got through maybe 5 plays before he shut it off. That is just like the least Mike McDaniel quarterback of all time is Joe Milton.
True. Yeah.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's probably what happened.
No, that makes sense because it's not very happening very quickly in the pocket with him. But again, and I guess I'm in the minority because if we saw the return that the Patriots got from the Dallas Cowboys in the trade, it wasn't much. What was it, Milton and a 7 for a 5? Yeah,
it was like a late round pick swap.
Yeah. So it tells you he wasn't necessarily high demand. So maybe I'm completely off my rocker here. Wouldn't be the first time I can do the comments are coming up like, yeah, par for the course. Absolutely. But sometimes you got to swing big to hit a home run. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Please like, subscribe if you are not already doing so. If you are doing so, tell your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, strangers even. The site has reached 15K, which is good, but how about let's shoot for 20 before the start of the 25 season. Is that too ambitious? Probably too ambitious. Anyway, big thanks to Dante Colonelli. Read his fine work on Miami Dolphins on SI.com, on social media at, shockingly enough, Dante Colonelli. You see the name spelling for those
easy to find.
So for those listening on the audio podcast, it would be at Dante, common spelling, Colonelli, Collinelli. Pat, I'll take an L.
Okay. You'd like to buy a consonant.
I like a buy. Well, no, you're buying a buy also.
Yeah, anyway, you have to buy that. You don't buy consonants.
Exactly. So, and as soon as I said, I realized taking an L is not necessarily the best phrase to throw out there. So, yeah, maybe we've been taking an L on this podcast for a while. Who knows? Anyway, that before I keep rambling like this, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great rest of your day.